The coffee cup hit the pavement before he did. One moment, Marcus was smiling, answering a stranger's question. The next, he was on the ground, hands pressed into his back, the weight of a knee crushing his breath. He hadn't shouted, hadn't fought, hadn't even moved. His crime? Standing in the wrong place, while being the wrong color. But what happened after that? How a single phone camera shattered the silence, would ignite a fight far bigger than him. And it all began here. The glass of champagne toppled over, splashing across the cream leather seat. Gasps erupted from the small but lavish cabin, and then, smack! The sound echoed in the confined space like a gunshot. The black man in the tailored navy suit didn't flinch. He just stared at her, eyes locked, as though trying to decide whether to stand or stay seated and keep what little dignity the moment had left him. "Get off my plane," the flight attendant said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a rage that looked disturbingly rehearsed. In the front row, two assistants shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the CEO and the furious woman. The engines hummed. In the background, the door still closed. No one moved, and then, almost casually, she leaned into the cockpit and said something to the pilot. 10 minutes later, the CEO's phone lit up with a message from his assistant. "You're not going to believe this." She's firing everyone on the team. 2 hours earlier. It had started like any other high-profile business trip. Elijah Brooks, founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, had been summoned, to a luxury meeting with an international investor. The company's biggest deal to date was on the line. The investor had sent their private jet, a pristine Gulfstream G650, along with a small crew. Everything about the trip screamed exclusive. The catering was immaculate. The champagne was Dom Perignon. The leather seats looked untouched. But Elijah had noticed something the moment he boarded. She didn't greet him. The flight attendant, whose perfectly styled hair and immaculate uniform suggested years of elite service, simply glanced at him before directing her attention to the two white executives trailing behind. He brushed it off. Years of being the only black man in a room full of power had taught him to let subtle slights slide. But this wasn't going to be subtle for long. As the plane prepared for departure, Elijah chatted quietly with his assistant, going over last-minute figures for the pitch. The flight attendant offered drinks to everyone except him. When his assistant asked for a sparkling water on his behalf, the woman returned with a still water instead, in a paper cup. It wasn't worth making a scene. Not yet. Halfway through the flight, she approached him directly for the first time. "Sir, you can't use that laptop right now," she said curtly. He glanced at the others. Every single one of them had theirs open. "Why not?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed. "Because I said so." The conversation could have ended there. But it didn't. By the time they landed, the tension was palpable. The investors' team boarded for the return trip, and Elijah tried to push the discomfort aside. He needed to keep his head clear for the meeting, and then came the champagne. He never found out if she tripped on purpose or not, but the moment it splashed onto his suit jacket, she didn't apologize. She glared, and then she slapped him. That slap was more than just an insult. It was a trigger. In that instant, years of coded remarks, cold shoulders, and condescending stares condensed into one sharp crack against his face. But Elijah didn't know yet that this wasn't a random outburst. It was a calculated move, and the real power play hadn't even started. Elijah's cheek burned, not from the force of the slap, but from the humiliation. It wasn't just the physical sting, it was the fact that the cabin was silent, and no one had said a word. The two white executives sitting across from him shifted uncomfortably, but their eyes avoided his. They weren't going to risk the investor's favor over this. The flight attendant straightened her uniform, smoothed back her hair, and smiled with that strange, confident calm you see in people who believe they're untouchable. "Captain," she called toward the cockpit, "before we open the door, I need to speak with you privately." Elijah watched as she disappeared up front. He tried to piece together what had just happened, but the whole thing made no sense. A slap? Overspilled champagne? She could have just apologized, or at worst, ignored him. Why escalate? When she returned, her voice carried across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a change in schedule. Only essential passengers will be boarding the return flight. Everyone else, you'll receive further instructions from the ground team." At first, Elijah thought she was talking about the investor's crew, but then his assistant's phone buzzed. The message made his stomach drop. From Corporate HR Effective. "Immediately, your employment with Crestwell Innovations has been terminated. Please collect your belongings from the hotel before 6 p.m. The assistant looked at him, eyes wide. "Sir, I just got fired." 2 more phones lit up. Same message, same timestamp, same cold, impersonal language. Elijah's first instinct was disbelief. His second was rage. Someone had coordinated this. Someone with enough pull to access HR's system in real time. This wasn't about a flight attendant with a bad attitude. This was about influence, intimidation, and a message. But whose message? He reached for his own phone, but before he could unlock it, the flight attendant, stepped closer. "You'll want to check your email, Mr. Brooks," she said with that infuriating calm. "It's important." He opened it. The subject line read, "Termination of contract, immediate." The body was short. "Your services as CEO are no longer required. The board will be issuing a formal statement tomorrow morning." A cold wave spread through him. He hadn't lost a deal. He'd lost his company, on a plane he didn't own, with people he didn't trust. The slap had been a distraction. The firing of his team? A warning shot. Whatever game was being played here, Elijah had just been cut out of it completely. As the cabin door opened and the warm air of the tarmac hit his face, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't an accident. And whoever had orchestrated it wanted him to know exactly who held the power now. The heavy thud of his polished shoes on the tarmac echoed in Elijah's ears like a slow drumbeat. He was no longer a passenger. He was a man stripped of his title, his company, and, if the people watching from the terminal windows had any say, his dignity. 2 security agents were waiting. Not airline security, private. Suits crisp, sunglasses reflective, earpieces humming faint static. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. One simply gestured toward a black SUV idling a few feet away. His assistant, now former assistant, was standing off to the side, clutching her laptop bag like a shield. "Sir, what do we do?" she whispered. Elijah didn't answer. Because right then, a woman stepped out of the SUV. She wasn't the flight attendant. She was older, taller, and carried herself like she'd been running boardrooms since before Elijah had even learned to pitch a business plan. Her charcoal gray pantsuit was immaculate. Her smile was a weapon. "Elijah Brooks," she said, extending a hand he didn't take. "I'm Cassandra Vale. I speak for the majority shareholders of Crestwell Innovations." He didn't move. "You could have sent an email," he said flatly. "Oh, we did," she replied. "But emails can be ignored. Moments like this, they stay with you forever." It was the way she said it, smooth, deliberate, that made his stomach twist. She was enjoying this. "What is this about?" Elijah asked. "Control," she said simply. "You've been resistant to certain strategic changes we've proposed. The board feels the company needs a leader willing to align with their vision. You weren't that leader." "And the slap?" he asked, his voice dropping low. Cassandra's smile widened just enough to show she'd been waiting for that question. That was symbolic. You don't walk away from a confrontation when the world is watching. You make it memorable. People talk, they speculate, and by tomorrow morning, the only thing anyone will remember is that your reign ended with a public humiliation you couldn't control. Elijah's mind flashed back to the flight attendant's calm after the slap, the way she'd disappeared into the cockpit, the immediate firings. It hadn't been her idea. She'd been a player in someone else's script. "You think this ruins me?" Elijah asked. Cassandra's eyes softened in a way that was almost patronizing. "Oh, Elijah, this isn't about ruining you. It's about replacing you before you become a problem we can't manage. The investors will move on. The press will move on. And so will you." The security agents stepped forward, not aggressively, but with a silent insistence. The conversation was over. As the SUV door closed behind Cassandra, Elijah stood on the tarmac, the jet's engines whirring to life behind him. She was right. People would talk. But what she didn't know was that Elijah had already been recording. The slap had been public. Now so was the truth. The hotel room smelled faintly of fresh linen and betrayal. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, his phone on the nightstand, screen glowing with the audio file he'd just replayed for the 4th time. It was all there. Cassandra Vale's voice, calm and calculated, explaining the board's motive. He'd turned on his smartwatch's recorder the moment she stepped out of the SUV. A habit he'd picked up over years of walking into meetings where he knew the odds were against him. But a recording wasn't enough. Not in their world. He needed proof that this coup had been orchestrated long before he stepped onto that jet. Proof that the slap, the firings, and the public spectacle were part of a single deliberate play to strip him of power and credibility. Hours blurred together as he combed through his email archives, board meeting notes, and private Slack messages. It was in a hidden folder buried beneath generic financial reports that he found it. Metadata from a company document created 6 months earlier. Subject: Leadership Transition Plan, Phase 3. The plan outlined a timeline for Elijah's removal, PR talking points framing it as a mutual decision, and a budget allocation for unexpected operational incidents designed to expedite leadership change. The kicker? The document's author was listed as Mara Kelson. Mara Kelson wasn't a board member. She wasn't even an executive. She was the flight attendant. Elijah leaned back, the realization hitting him hard. She wasn't just a pawn. She was on the payroll. Her real job wasn't to serve drinks, but to play her part in a calculated takedown. And she'd been working for Cassandra Vale long before that day's flight. It explained her confidence, her composure, the way she'd weaponized the cabin like a stage. Elijah's pulse quickened as a plan began to form. If he could link Mara directly to the leadership transition plan and show the recording of Cassandra admitting the slap was intentional, he could flip the narrative overnight, not just to save his reputation, but to expose the board for corporate sabotage. He reached for his phone and called the only person he still trusted in the company, Darius Cole, head of IT security. "Darius, it's Elijah." A pause. "Man, you're radioactive right now. You sure you want to be calling me?" "I don't have time for safe," Elijah said. "I need access to archived security logs and travel records for one Mara Kelson. She's the flight attendant from today's trip. I think she's been traveling with certain board members for months." Darius hesitated. "If I pull those records, I'm risking my job." Elijah's voice hardened. "You won't have a job to risk if Cassandra Vale gets her way. This isn't just about me. She's setting a precedent. Next time it'll be you." Silence, then a resigned sigh. "All right. Give me 12 hours. As Elijah ended the call, he felt the weight of the fight ahead. They'd taken his company, his team, and tried to take his name, but they'd underestimated him. They thought the slap would humiliate him into silence. Instead, it had lit the fuse. The hotel curtains were drawn tight when Elijah's phone buzzed. Darius. Got something. Meet me in 30. Usual place. The usual place was a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of the financial district, a spot they'd used for years to talk off the record. No corporate ears, no curious eyes. When Elijah walked in, Darius was already there, a laptop open, his expression tense. "You weren't kidding," Darius said, spinning the screen toward him. On it was a map dotted with pins, private flights, all chartered under different shell company names. Each flight had a familiar passenger, Mara Kelson. "She's been traveling with Cassandra for months," Darius continued. "Every trip lines up with a major board decision. Sometimes she's on flights with other executives who voted against you in the last 2 quarters. Elijah studied the list, his pulse quickening. "So she's not just some part-time plant. She's a fixer," Darius nodded. "And it gets worse." He pulled up another file, a spreadsheet of wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving between offshore accounts, most routed through a company registered in the Cayman Islands. The account owner, Crestwell Innovations, Strategic Affairs Division. "Except," Darius said, "this division doesn't exist on any official org chart." Elijah leaned forward. "Where's the money going?" Darius clicked through, revealing a chain of transactions ending in the hands of regulators, journalists, even a rival tech firm that had been circling Crestwell's patents for years. It wasn't just a coup, it was a hostile takeover by proxy, greased with bribes and influence. And then Darius showed him the smoking gun. A hidden folder in the secure company server, protected by multiple encryption layers. Inside was a PDF titled Final Phase Brooks Removal. The document detailed everything, from the staged operational incident, the slap, to pre-written media statements painting Elijah as volatile and unfit for leadership. There was even a section anticipating potential legal pushback, advising Cassandra to leak personal misconduct rumors if necessary. Elijah sat back, his mind spinning. They'd planned to erase him not just professionally, but personally. And if this plan had been executed quietly, no one would have believed it was deliberate. But now he had dates, names, flight logs, bank records, and a voice recording. Enough to burn their empire to the ground, if he played it right. Darius closed the laptop. "You can't just drop this online. They'll bury you in lawsuits and spin it before the public ever hears the truth." "I know," Elijah said, "which is why we're not going to leak it. Not yet." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Then what's the move?" Elijah's gaze hardened. "We're going to make Cassandra Vale think she's already won. And then, when she's at her most confident, we'll pull the floor out from under her, in front of the same investors she's trying to impress." Darius grinned slowly. "You're playing the long game." "No," Elijah said, standing. "I'm playing her game, and she's about to learn what it's like to lose." The email to Cassandra Vale was short, polished, and deliberately deferential. Subject: Closure discussion. Cassandra. While I strongly disagree with the manner of my removal, I believe it's in the company's best interest for us to close this chapter professionally. I'm available for a face-to-face meeting to discuss the transition. Let me know a time that works for you. Elijah Brooks. It was bait, and she took it. Within 2 hours, her assistant replied, "Cassandra will meet you tomorrow at the Harbor Club, 10:30 a.m. The Harbor Club wasn't just any venue. It was a private dining hall for the city's most powerful financiers, and more importantly, it had terrible acoustics for private conversations, unless you knew where to stand. Elijah did that night. He made his calls. First, to a handful of journalists with impeccable reputations for exposing corporate corruption. Second, to 2 high-profile investors who'd supported him in the past, people Cassandra couldn't afford to alienate. And last, to a discreet AV technician who owed him a favor. The plan was simple. The meeting would be recorded, streamed in real time to a private server, and shared only with his allies until the moment was right. The next morning, Elijah arrived early. The Harbor Club's glass facade gleamed in the late morning sun, its doormen in tailored suits. Inside, the dining room overlooked the marina, where million-dollar yachts rocked gently in their slips. He positioned himself at a corner table, one with a reflective surface and a direct line of sight to the tiny pinhole camera embedded in the ceiling molding. At 10:29 sharp, Cassandra walked in, all tailored confidence and cool authority. Mara Kelson trailed behind her, not in uniform, but in a sleek black dress. She didn't look like a flight attendant now. She looked like exactly what she was, an operative. "Elijah," Cassandra said smoothly, sliding into her seat. "I'm glad you reached out. I respect a man who knows when to accept the inevitable." He smiled faintly. "Inevitable is a strong word. So is permanent." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. The first 10 minutes were corporate. Theater. Vague talk about future direction and protecting the company's legacy. But Elijah kept steering the conversation toward the events on the plane. "You called the slap symbolic," he said. "Was humiliating me part of the board's official policy or just your personal touch?" Cassandra's lips curved. "Symbolism matters, Elijah. You made yourself untouchable in the boardroom. We had to remind you and everyone else that no one is untouchable." Mara chuckled softly, as if it were all a game. That was the moment. Elijah leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough for the microphone to catch it clearly. "I have your offshore transfers, I have your fake strategic affairs division, and I have you on record admitting to bribing regulators and staging my removal. How do you think the SEC will feel about that?" The smile froze on Cassandra's face. Mara's eyes flicked to the exits. "You're bluffing," Cassandra said, but there was a tremor under the words. "Am I?" Elijah replied. "Because right now, this conversation is being watched by 3 of the biggest investors you're trying to court, and 2 investigative reporters who would love to make this their next cover story." For the first time since this war began, Cassandra Vale looked uncertain, and Elijah knew the tide had just turned. Cassandra's gaze darted around the room, eyes sharp but calculating. Her usual calm was cracking. She took a deep breath, then smiled, a forced, brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Brooks," she said smoothly, "you're playing a dangerous game. Accusations like these can ruin lives and reputations." Elijah leaned back, voice steady. "That's why I'm giving you a chance to respond, because when this goes public, the truth won't be negotiable." Mara, sitting quietly beside Cassandra, suddenly stood and moved toward the door. "You're making a mistake," Mara whispered to Cassandra, eyes cold. But Cassandra ignored her. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a phone, tapping furiously. Within moments, the sound of incoming messages buzzed on several devices at the table. Elijah's phone lit up with a dozen new texts. "Threats?" he asked, scanning the screen. "No," Cassandra said, voice clipped. "Damage control." On Elijah's phone was a flood of official-looking emails. Press releases drafted by Cassandra's PR team, internal memos from board members reaffirming their full confidence in her leadership, and a smear campaign targeting Elijah's character. They were trying to bury him, but Elijah was ready. "Darius has already leaked encrypted copies of all the documents to key regulatory bodies," Elijah said. "They're reviewing everything now." "And the journalists outside?" He tapped his phone to play a live feed. A reporter was standing just outside the club's front doors, broadcasting live to thousands of viewers, announcing an exclusive coming soon. Cassandra's face paled. The game was over. She glanced at Mara, who pulled out a small flash drive and slid it across the table. "Here's what you want," Mara said quietly, eyes locked on Elijah's. "But be careful. This isn't the end." Elijah took the drive and looked up. "You're right," he said. "It's just the beginning." As Cassandra and Mara exited the club under a swarm of flashing cameras and shouted questions, Elijah allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He'd lost the battle on that jet, but he was winning the war. The days that followed were a storm. Regulators launched formal investigations. Major news outlets broke the story wide open. Investors demanded answers. The hashtag Dasha Justice for Elijah trended worldwide, sparking conversations far beyond the boardrooms. And luxury jets. Inside Crestwell Innovations, the fallout was seismic. The board was forced to call an emergency meeting, live-streamed due to intense public pressure. Cassandra Vale and Mara Kelson faced harsh scrutiny, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under relentless questioning. One by one, key allies abandoned them. The offshore accounts were frozen. Bribes traced back to high-ranking officials became public knowledge. Elijah watched it all unfold from a small conference room, flanked by his loyal former team members, now reinstated as part of an emergency restructuring plan. The company's interim leadership publicly apologized for the toxic culture and pledged to implement new anti-discrimination policies and oversight measures. But for Elijah, the victory was more than professional. Standing. At a press conference, he addressed the crowd with steady resolve. This was never just about me. It was about every person who's been silenced, sidelined, or dismissed because of who they are. Today, we take a step toward changing that, not just for Crestwell, but for every company and community that still has work to do. The slap-on. The jet was a moment meant to break him. Instead, it became the spark that ignited change. And though the scars remained, both seen and unseen, Elijah's story became a beacon of resilience, courage, and the undeniable truth that power built on injustice will always fall.